Ladies and gentlemen, The Walking Dead Destinies is here, and I've been looking forward to this game ever since it was announced.
Reaction for it maybe 2 months ago, and it felt like a long-lost dream finally coming true. Is it a dream coming true 10 years too late? Yes.
What I'm warning you right now, Game Mill Publishing, the company releasing this game, is one of the worst.
This is so funny. Oh my god, what the fuck is happening?
Walkers you're fighting against, there's actually human enemies, and they can be challenging as well, even though oftentimes they're dumb as nails.
I don't know why we can't get any good The Walking Dead game.
Thank you for choosing Angsty Teen.
So this video is going to be shot a little bit differently, mainly because A, I don't want to be in front of a camera right now, and 2, this isn't really worth a full-scale video. Also, excuse my voice, I just woke up. So, The Walking Dead. People like. The Walking Dead Destinies, people don't like. And for actually good reason. Now, the reason why I say that is because nowadays when people are hating on a game, it's usually for something very small, like graphics, or maybe there's like one character design they didn't like. Sometimes people just make up reasons too, like for example, there was a slightly darker skinned character in Genshin Impact way back, and Twitter went insane because they weren't person of color enough. Like, y'all realize dark-skinned Asians exist, right? And then, of course, there's games like Minecraft that get divided audiences, mainly because of an update that people either did or didn't like or didn't approve of how they were done. But the way I see it, humanity was right about 2 things. Sonic 06, mechanics were trash, but also about The Walking Dead Destinies. Now, it's worth mentioning that I've never actually seen the show that much because I don't have a way to watch it right now. I don't really have any subscription services. But I was recently able to get my hand on the first compendium as well as the Telltale series. And when I talked about the game in a community post shortly before the release, I mentioned that I was worried about 2 things. How the stories would go, but also about it ending up like the rest of the Walking Dead games. And it's not necessarily that they're bad, but the majority of them tend to be a copy-paste version of popular tropes in other games. I mean, even the Telltale game came out at a time where that kind of video gaming experience was on the rise. Saints and Sinners was kind of like your stereotypical shooter with some resource building, so it stood out in a way, but it was still kind of relatively a average gaming experience. Like, it wasn't bad, it was actually pretty good, but like I said, the tropes. They tried an AR game called The Walking Dead Our World, with the rise of Pokemon Go, with in-game purchases. And I was reading the reviews, and apparently it gets very hard to progress without buying anything at certain levels. Among other games around similar premises, so it's not that the games were necessarily bad, it was just that some of them were a little bit average. Like, it usually brought nothing necessarily new to the table or the genre. Which I'm not saying that all games need to, I'm just saying that they don't really stick out too much. But I mean, it's kind of hard to turn an ongoing franchise like The Walking Dead into a game, especially if you have multiple different devs working on it with many different interpretations of the series and the characters. In fact, a lot of the more successful ones seem to take place in the same world but follow different characters, or maybe it's the same characters but a different concept. So when The Walking Dead Destinies was announced, and promising to make these major changes and be what was probably going to be the best game ever in 2023, people were hyped, and why wouldn't you? You would get a lot of answers to all those what-if scenarios that people have been conversing over for relatively years, even as the franchise was going on. And from what they're making it sound like, it wasn't going to be another situation like the Telltale where after the first season you play, your actions don't really affect the story much. But as more information got released about the game, people began to worry. First, it was talking about the graphics, which was either on the studio's part or it was because they were planning on having this game run on so many different operating systems that it would require a bit of a lower end graphics, similar to how other games did when they cross-platformed. Mainly because if you didn't, you would have a Dreamcast and GameCube situation where when you converted the games, things would look very, very different or have a lot more bugs. And that's not even starting on the PC port. I'm sorry, I can't even be mad at it. It's just But yeah, having a game that works on other systems to the same ability that the graphics cards can be a little difficult to keep consistent.
But it's not impossible because we're in 2023.
Like, it can't even be much of an excuse anymore at this point. And it also depends on the company you hand the game over to on whether or not their designs will be appealing in a lower graphic style. Which I can agree that one of the most prominent issues in modern gaming, mostly in the indie industry, is game optimization. Now, while you don't need to have your game run on every single potato computer, at least have some options to lower the graphics a little bit so that the operating systems can give you more audience members. Sometimes it's not even the graphics itself, it's the fact that the developers use so many polygons for like a straight line. Now, in my opinion, the graphics they showed weren't that bad, but it kind of seems like that from scene to scene, there's a little bit of a difference in model from the trailers to the gameplay. In fact, I was even looking back and forth between gameplay and the previews they showed. And I think the issue is that the majority of the models are designed to be viewed from very far away. Like, if you look at some of the screenshots, they don't look that bad, but they're also not shot at the same angle in the games. And the game itself is a third-person game, so it would kind of make sense, but when you have close-up still image cutscenes, you gotta make a change. I know a lot of people joke about the cutscene graphics versus the game graphics in a lot of older games, but the quality of which comes down to a few things, and that's operating systems, compatibility, as well as whether or not it will show exactly what you want to show. Cutscene models or scenes would often be a little bit more expressive than the in-game models specifically because of this. What The Walking Dead Destinies does wrong is that not only do they not edit any of the face rigs for the models or any of the limbs or textures to be viewed a little bit closer, but there's little to no movement or expression. Everything's so stiff. Now, I have seen scenes like this work well in video games, and I know what they were trying to go for, but they had a basic idea and didn't do anything with it. An example of something like this working is the Frostpunk opening cinematics, which was comprised of a lot of still scenes and still images, but there were a number of things that made it appear more lively. And when movement needed to be emphasized, they switched over to 3D models. Now, the reason why that last part is important is because a lot of things shot in 2D that just pans over would not necessarily work with the kind of 3D models that Walking Dead Destinies has. To simplify the key components, I'm going to bring them down to one word. And the number one thing is movement. If not the characters, the camera, or the environment. Even the lighting or effects would do you some service. The way that's shot is like a poorly blocked out storyboard rather than a finished cutscene. And while the camera does move, it's kind of dumbed down to simple panned movements. Linear movements, if you will. Now, some of the environment does kind of pan along with the camera, which good on them, you know, basic perspective. Now, the models weren't exactly the worst, and neither was, you know, the company.
This is Ed or L, and I retract my statement. I saw the monkey atrocity. I don't think giving the benefit of a doubt to a company with a track record is appropriate here.
So what went wrong here with the movements? Well, a major thing is the fact that they mostly focused on polishing other scenes, whereas leaving other scenes in the dust, from what it looks like. Sometimes there are drastic shifts in art style, but even for just maybe a moment or a few scenes, and then it just cuts back to the models. Another thing that can make or break any piece of media that you're making with scenes is the fact that the camera lingers on the same scene for way too long. Even in storyboarding or making animatics, the characters are always moving a little bit to what they're saying or the scene itself. By changing the scenes, you help the audience understand that this isn't just a bunch of lifeless mannequins just standing with a weird pan on it. When I took a video class, my teacher had a 5-second rule when it came to still images or when it came to lingering on the same scene. But even then, because it's done with a camera, there's a lot more movement in the environment. Some of these scenes linger for a good 10 seconds before they switch with nothing much to offer. And the camera angles don't really do much service either. There are some moments where a Dutch tilt would have drastically improved the scene. And other moments where even an overshot view or a far away view would have worked. And the positions that the models are in aren't exactly exaggerated in a way to intensify emotion. Or even movement for that matter. Like I think in this scene they're supposed to be walking, but it just kind of looks like that they're just stiff and just standing awkwardly. And it doesn't help that there's like radio silence in the background. And that's another component that's key to these, and that's the dialogue. And the dialogue sounds so awkward.
So, the park's full of walkers.
That's it! We either take care of this right now, or we just gotta go!
Like, I get what they're trying to mimic. They're trying to mimic the dramatic pauses between dialogue in the show itself, which I get that, but there's a reason why it worked in the show and doesn't work here, and that's because in those silences, you can see expressions shift. You can see the dynamic change between characters. You can see the body language shift. There's other movements to accompany the silence that makes it seem less awkward. With Walking Dead Destinies, all you get are just still images with these awkward silences in between dialogue. And like I said, the model's expressions, they're not really intensified enough to invoke anything other than the basic emotions, without looking strange, that is. But without this movement in the scenes, the dialogue doesn't feel finished, and neither does the scene. A simple pan or maybe a smooth blur to the next position would have been enough. A change in lighting, a change in music, anything could have worked. In any case, if you're adapting a show to a video game, you need to keep everything in mind about why certain things worked, because they're not always going to transition perfectly to a video game, let alone depending on the style of the cutscene. It's not for the love of God that this layout doesn't work, it's just that you need to make it work. You need to design things around what is restrictive about the style you're trying to go for, so there's not like a jarring shift and so that it feels like it's alive to begin with. Hell, you're asking people to pay $50 for the game. At least keep some of this in mind at the very least, if not fixing your damn mechanics. That's all I basically wanted to talk about, because the way that they did the cutscenes kind of just... it gives off the impression that nobody was certified to do the job. Because these are little basic middle school tips I was taught when I took a video class. And another thing is that everyone knows it doesn't work, but they don't seem to know exactly what's making it not work. And like, it's not too late, you could make the differences right now, but the damage is already done when you're asking people to pay $50 for what looks like an unfinished game with unfinished cutscenes. It could have been a great game, but what's stopping it is just the lack of life in these cutscenes, as well as stilted mechanics. Now, I'm not much of a mechanic person, so I'm not really going to be talking about that. I'm much more of like a camera kind of person. A make your scenes have life kind of person. A have the simple decency to re-look at your work and see why it seems so stiff kind of person. A lot of it is like easy fix though. Like, I'm not mad, I'm just severely disappointed.